Welcome to our weekly program, Dinsa Story of Chabad in America through the Mindel Archives. Today is Yud Beis Tammuz, the Chag HaGeula of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Yud Beis Tammuz, the Yontif, big Yontif of Yud Beis Tammuz. So today I want to share with you a Ksav Yad that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to Rabbi Mindel. He wrote it in Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, and he translated, Rabbi Mindel translated that into English. Now, as a side note, he writes to him, Yedidi Nissen, Rabbi Mindel was named Nissen. Now, to say it's Yud Beis Tammuz, I want to tell you something that the Rebbe mentioned years ago in one of the letters. Vosik v'chosid. What is Vosik v'chosid? Why Vosik? So the Rebbe answered somebody. It wasn't the Rabbi Mindel, somebody else. Vosik means Vosikin. He spoke to some, the Chosid has to go to shul like a Vosik early, the Chosid, and he has to go out of shul like a Chosid. Now I'll tell you another word, because of Yud Beis Tammuz, what the Rebbe told Rabbi Mindel. You know, Rabbi Mindel, when he went into dictation, to take dictation, this was work. He didn't ask any private things for anybody. This was strictly, if he had to ask, he always wrote. But he never, when he took dictation on the Hebrew letters and the English letters, in all the letters, everything, it's only straight work, he, the Rebbe, that's all. One time, someone begged him. I write to the Rebbe all the time, maybe 7-8 letters, and the Rebbe never answers me. Do me a favor, he says to Rabbi Mindel. Do me a favor. When you go and tell the Rebbe, ask him why he doesn't answer. He asked him so many times. So he asked the Rebbe. He said to the Rebbe, he asked me about why he didn't answer. So the Rebbe says, Du bist doch a maskir. So it's good that you reminded me. That's what I told him. Du bist doch a maskir. You're a maskir, so thank you for reminding me. And the Rebbe next day answered him. This is a story that I heard from Rabbi Mindel. So about a month later, or 2 months later, since the Rebbe told us to Rabbi Mindel, so Rabbi Mindel thought, it always bothered him that the Rebbe always says, it says, Odom la'omal yivolid. I think it's yivolid. And the Rebbe says, Odom la'omal yulod. Doesn't say yivolid. So it bothers him why the Rebbe always, But since the Rebbe said to him 2 months ago, you're a maskir, you remind me. So he asked the Rebbe, why do you say Odom la'omal yulod, not yivolid? Excuse me. So the Rebbe gave a big smile. That's it. The Rebbe still continued later on saying Odom Lomel Yulod. So I wanted to mention to you a word on Yud Beis Tammuz. Now let's go to the letter. The letter is in Hebrew. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote, Rabbi Mindel wrote back. But let me give you a Hagdoma first. And this is written by Rabbi Mindel. Introduction. In the year 1944, in Manhattan, New York, there was a weekly learning class given by Mr. He was the rabbi, Alexander Cowan. You know, Alexander Cowan in Kohos has, I think, pamphlets that he wrote about film, I think, mezuzah. This class was in a dentist office. Two intellectuals, scientists, with about 20 people. And the class that Mr. Cowan gave he had a textbook. First he read the textbook and then they discussed it. He read maybe 4 pages. The book is called Bible Unauthorized. And I don't want to go into it, who wrote Bible. The Rabbi definitely had a connection with that, but I don't want to go into that now. But that was the book that Mr. Cowan read. The Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe, he was then called the Ramash, were very interested in this group, in this class. Every single week, the Frierdiker Rebbe sent Rabbi Mindel, I think it was Wednesday night, to participate in the class. And every single week, the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe were waiting for Rabbi Mindel to come back and get a report of that class. Probably it was the first adult education class in America. This was in 1944. And also questions they wanted to know from Rabbi Mindel, what they asked. And the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, the Ramash, that he should write down the answers. And then we're not going to have time today for sure, to answer all the questions that but the Rebbe answers, Biksav Yad Koche, with his own handwriting. This happened every week. One day, Rabbi Mindel writes, that's to the Frierdiker Rebbe, after class, after Rabbi Mindel, he gave a report to the Frierdiker Rebbe that Alexander Cowan gives a nice class, nice lesson. And he also participated, Rabbi Mindel says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he also participated in this as the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted to. But the listeners need more words to inspire them. That's how he tells the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's a little boring. I don't know. They need more inspiration. So the Frierdiker Rebbe tells Rabbi Mindel, tell them a story. And that story will give them inspiration. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to Rabbi Mindel, now, Rabbi Mindel writes this, I will put down on paper for you a chapter from my memoirs where I report about my interrogation in the summer of 5681-1921 in Tammuz, when I was summoned to the Cheka, later called GPU in Rostov. The Frierdiker Rebbe then proceeds to write down in Hebrew the story of his interrogation. This handwritten paper he gives to Rabbi Mindel. He writes it to him to translate in English and share with the Manhattan Torah class. Rabbi Mindel writes, he promptly translated the story in English, and next week he read this letter to them And that the Frierdiker Rebbe said will give them encouragement in the class. I am going to read to you now, since today is Yud Beis Tammuz, I'm going to read this letter written in Lashon Kodesh. I have the original that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote, 2 pages, his own handwriting. I'm going to read to you this letter now. Rabbi Mendel is writing this from the Frierdiker Rebbe. But he's writing this in a way, the way he read it to them. It was in the summer of 1921, in the month of Tammuz, July, when the Rebbe writes this, but Rabbi Mendel tells them, when the Rebbe was invited to appear at the Cheka Extraordinary Committee, later to be called as the GPU, the equivalent of the Nazi Gestapo, and dreaded no less, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes. The Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe, was then in Rostov, and the invitation was the customary one, as the Rebbe was davening, still in mourning after his father. 3 Chekists entered the room armed to their teeth with rifles, guns, knives, and belt of ammunition. Not attempting to disguise their hatred, they went up to the Rebbe writes all this, and told him he was requested to accompany them immediately to the Cheka. Two of them were of the Yevsektia, that's Jewish section, and the third was a Gentile. When the Rebbe writes himself, when the Rebbe told them he wished to conclude his prayers, the 2 Jews almost fell upon him, trying to tear off his tallis and film. And were it not for their Gentile companion, they would have forced him to accompany them before concluding his prayer. The Gentile guard, however, prevailed upon them to let the Rebbe conclude his prayer. Now the Rebbe then davened by the Omid, because that was the year of the Rebbe of Avelis of the Rebbe Rashab. This is 1921. Then he writes there, incidentally, the Rebbe writes, the Rebbe recognized one of the Jews as a native of Shavel, having once come to him for help, and the Rebbe secured a position for him with a tobacco firm, and even lent him some money to start a business of his own. That was, of course, before the revolution. When the Rebbe concluded saying the last Kaddish, he took off his tallis and tefillin and accompanied them to the dreaded Cheka. The Rebbe had an armed guard on each side of him and one walking behind like a very dangerous criminal. In those days, one never knew whether one could come back alive from a visit to the Cheka. He was led into a large room where some of 15 men sat at a long table on each side, with 2 men at its head. The Rebbe was placed at the end of the table, still surrounded by the armed guard. One of the 2 men sitting at the head of the table turned to the Rebbe, saying, "We are members of the committee investigating religious activity under the auspices of the party. We are engaged at present in investigating the Jewish faith. We had some questions cleared up by Rabbi Berman and Goldberg, whom we had invited here. Now you have been invited to clear some questions with regard to Kabbalah and Hasidus." This person, the Rebbe writes, spoke in Russian. The Rebbe replied in Yiddish. They spoke in Russian. The Rebbe answered only Yiddish. "I have already been invited twice before the Cheka, when I already stated that I would not deviate from my principles, and the man or devil hasn't been created yet who could make me give up as much as an iota." Die Starkheit von Rebbe. Before the Rebbe managed to conclude his few words, one of the Czechs present, sitting near the head of the table, picked up his gun, lying in front of him. In addition to being armed with a gun, each one had a gun lying on the table before him, no doubt to intimidate these taken for an inquisition, saying, "This toy does away with many principles and opens the mouth of the dumb." The Rebbe writes, "You are absolutely mistaken," the Rebbe said, "for this toy impresses only those who do not believe. These cowards who have only one world and many gods, to whom each passion is a god, and they are afraid to lose this only world. But as to Jews who have only one God, but 2 worlds, this toy does not frighten, and even makes no impression whatsoever." So all these things that we know about that, the Biblis Talmud, but what happened, we know from, I guess, Likutei Diburim, it says, but this is a letter that the Rebbe himself wrote. I think it comes from the letter that he wrote to Rabbi Mindel. This is handwritten. "We have not called you for the purpose of annoying you," said the chairman. "And let's hear your principles. Maybe we can get together on them." "My principle is that I do not wish to hear nor speak any other language but Jewish. Even amongst Christians," the Rebbe writes, "and especially amongst men who belong to the Jewish people." So they asked, "How do you know that we are all Jewish? That we are all Jews?" One of them asked. So the Rebbe said, "Maybe I'm mistaken. And not all of those present here are Jews. My grandfather," the Rebbe says, which is the Rebbe Marash, "could recognize a Jew at a glance even in the street." And then the Rebbe says, once when he was in Kiev, walking along Krechnik Street, the Marash stopped a young man dressed in modern clothes. Clearly anxious to disguise his Jewish origin, and asked him where a famous professor lived. The young man became incensed and said, he got upset, he got angry. "How do you know that I am a Jew?" Said my grandfather, "The bris left an effect upon your nose." Now, the Rabbi says, I cannot recognize by that same criterion, but I still believe I am not mistaken, the Rabbi says. The first question was, you observe your faith in every detail. You keep your heads covered. You wear tzitzis, and so forth. Now all these things you do you do it because of conviction or because of your faith and habit? So the Rebbe answers, from absolute conviction, said the Rebbe. If so, convince us also and bring us to the same spiritual level as yours, they said. So the Rebbe answered, I am prepared to oblige you, and surely you will give me an opportunity to fulfill your request. You will admit, however, that if a student of astronomy is stopped in the street by someone with a request to explain to him the system of the stars and planets, surely the student of astronomy would tell him, I cannot explain it to you here in the street right now, but if you really wish to learn, come up to the planetarium and you will see with your own eyes through the telescope the movements of the stars and planets. Similarly, I say to you, the Rebbe says, if you really want to learn and be convinced about our faith in God and in the Torah, come with me to the house of God, put on tefillin, eat kosher, observe Shabbos, and then your mind will be clarified as well as your heart, and you will be able to understand an ethical thought, and I will surely bring you little by little to that conviction in the truth of our faith and our Torah. But they said, but first explain to us intellectually, and then we'll take it upon to observe the Jewish faith. But until then, we cannot accept the religious matters as truth. So the Rebbe answers, you surely know, definitely, that food not merely satisfies the stomach and gives strength, but even fattens, because it turns into blood and flesh. In medicine, the process of digestion is clearly explained. But suppose someone said, I shall refuse to eat until it will be explained to me how the food turns into blood and flesh. It is necessary to believe and eat and drink first, then go and study medicine if you wish. And so it is also with religion. And then my father-in-law writes after, the words made a profound impression. This is what the original letter that I have here in Hebrew, that the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote to Rabbi Mindel You could see how much he was interested in that class. Mamish. So after reading, they were so inspired that he asked a lot of questions based on the Bible and based on this letter, that this gave him a chayas. So since today is Yud Beis Tammuz, I wanted to share with you this very interesting letter. One more thing I want to say. Yud Beis Tammuz is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Mindel. He was born Beis Nisan, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rashab, and he passed away in Chag HaGeula. He was, all his life, he was with the Rebbe, with the Frierdiker Rebbe. This is what he came down to this world. So v'kitzu v'ranenu sheikh the offer v'hu b'soicham, and there should be tchiz hamesim very soon, and we should be zoiche mamish b'korev mamish. There should be peace in Eretz Yisrael. We should have a good and healthy summer. And in Mitzvah next week we'll continue our weekly program. Thank you.